A big welcome to everybody to today's conference, and I would like to start because unfortunately we're a little bit running late, and therefore let's start with this conference. We will have now some opening remarks by me, then some introductory remarks by Bruno, and then we will directly go to the panel, to the first panel, which Sirpa will lead, and then the speakers can come up later to the first panel. Wait, I don't know which microphone to use. Maybe this is one, always on the left. Okay, good. So, good evening, dear colleagues, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure to welcome you today to the European Parliament for this Global EU conference on bridging policy and practice on circular economy. This event unveils the outcome of two global EU working groups where experts have delved into the economic and strategic imperative for advancing circularity in Europe. And I would like to thank all speakers, moderators and participants, also online, for joining us. And I also would like very much to thank my office, especially here Margarete, for making it possible to have the event in the European Parliament. Today's conference, I have to say, comes exactly at the right moment. In just a few weeks, the European Commission will present its new Circular Economy Act, an initiative that has the potential to shape Europe's industrial future for many years to come. And this is an important opportunity, but also a responsibility. Because the question is no longer whether Europe needs circular economy. The real question is whether we are prepared to create the political framework that finally allows circularity to become the new economic standard. For decades, our economy has largely followed a linear model: extract, produce, consume, and dispose. The model no longer fits with the realities of the 21st century. Europe has limited natural resources. We import many of the raw materials our industries depend upon. At the same time, geopolitical tensions are making supply chains increasingly fragile. Every ton of valuable material that ends up as waste instead of returning to production represents not only an environmental loss, it is also an economic loss and a strategic vulnerability. A true circular economy therefore strengthens three objectives at the same time. First, it protects our environment and thus helps us to stay within planetary boundaries. It strengthens European competitiveness, and it increases European strategic resilience. And my party, the Ecologic Democratic Party, the ÖDP, has advocated genuine circularity for many years. For us, circularity is not simply a waste policy. It is a completely different way of thinking about resources. The guiding principle has always been resource conservation. The cleanest way is the waste that is never created. That is why we consistently support the waste hierarchy. Prevention comes first, followed by reuse, and only then recycling. And at the same time, wherever materials can no longer be avoided or reused, recycling must be of the highest possible quality. High-quality secondary raw material should become the preferred choice and replace virgin raw materials whenever equivalent quality can be achieved. Because a circular economy is not simply about managing waste more efficiently. It's about preserving the value of our resources for as long as possible, reducing our dependence on imported raw materials, and respect the ecological limits of our planet. And an export ban of materials also prevents the export of environmental problems to third countries. Europe must finally create a genuine market for these high-quality secondary raw materials. And too often today, recycled materials are still threatened as second-class resources, while primary materials continue to enjoy structural advantage. And this clearly has to change. If we want companies to invest in innovative recycling technologies, they must also have confidence that high-quality recycled materials will actually find a market. And this brings me to another crucial point. We in Europe have already outstanding companies that already show that circularity can look in practice. They invest in innovative technologies, they recover valuable materials, they reduce emissions, they create high-quality jobs. And I even know a company that, while producing high-quality secondary materials, destroys persistent organic pollutants like PFAS through low-carbon thermolyzers. These companies are proving that sustainability and industrial competitiveness can go hand in hand. And it is our duty to keep them in Europe and not to let them be bought by Chinese or go to the United States. So, and this discussion we'll have this evening reflects exactly about the challenges that we are facing in Europe. Our first panel will focus on the economic incentives and legislative framework that can make circular business models more successful, from extended producer responsibility and digital product passports to public procurement and the movement of secondary material across Europe. And our second panel will explore how behavioral change, education, investment, resource security, and cross-sector cooperation can help accelerate the transition. Both discussions remind us that circularity cannot be achieved through legislation alone. It requires cooperation between policymakers, businesses, researchers, investors, and civil society. And only together we can close material loops and build an economy that is both competitiveness and sustainable. Allow me to conclude with one final thought. Europe has often led the world by setting ambitious standards. Now we have the opportunity to lead again, not only by protecting our environment, but by creating a modern industrial model that combines innovation, competitiveness, and responsibility. Let's seize the opportunity. Let's make circularity the cornerstone of Europe's future economy. And I look very forward now to an inspiring discussion, but first to our dear colleague Bruno Tobak, who will give us some introductory comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Manuela. As you can see, we even share a microphone here in the Parliament. This is a really cross-party initiative. It's rare these days that we share it so closely. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for Manuela's team for taking most of the load in organizing this and getting everybody in the room. And you have noticed yourself how hard that can be in the European Parliament. Now it's already been mentioned. We are here partly because we are all eagerly awaiting the arrival of the Circular Economy Act. Eagerly awaiting means that we are still also mostly in the dark about what will actually be in it. But at least we are certain that this, the hopes are large, if only to judge by what we have seen in many different kinds of events and panels and discussions in the last 6 months. I think that hopes are high, ambitions are high. They are maybe not all extremely identically aligned, and therefore I think that the added value that an initiative such as GlobeEU can offer is to get a little bit deeper into some of those topics, also with some technical experts. And congrats to Roland-Jan for keeping this on track, and notably for having some very interesting workshops already taking place and bringing this discussion to a bit of a deeper level than is usually possible in this Parliament. It's one of the reasons why I very much enjoy working in GlobeEU and bringing people together that can really add some value. Now, of course, I am a politician, which means that I have my own opinion and think those are the smartest opinions that you can possibly hold. The problem is we all do. and there's 700 of us. But I'm not gonna try and preempt the two panel discussions. I would just like to focus on two things that I think are crucial to making any potential Circular Economy Act or acts a success and a step forward towards what we already have, because you have said it correctly, we have already achieved quite a lot in Europe and we are already front runners on many things in Europe. But I do think that one of the things that we need to do right now and that we really need to work on is a step towards a lot more harmonization than we see right now across our 27 member states, but also across a lot of European legislation that is already there or that is being prepared. I would say that the first challenge is to, in the coming months, and that is mostly a responsibility for the Commission, is to get the different acts together. We are working at the same time on an Industrial Accelerator Act. We have been discussing and voting actually on an end-of-life vehicles regulation or directive. I forget what it is. I'm new to this Parliament, sorry. But where all of them target clean production, target net zero industry sectors, provide targets for maybe recycled content in some products and some equipment. Some of them are talking about ambitions on made in Europe. And when I say bringing the acts together, I think that one of the issues that we should have tackled already in the end-of-life vehicles is to make sure that recycled content is also recycled in Europe. Is promoting European production, is promoting European activities and European technologies, and mostly that we should try to avoid getting 3, 4 or 5 separate legislations in place that all sort of overlap but don't really say the same thing. If you want to complicate things, that is a brilliant way of complicating things, and since we are all committed to simplifying things these days, I think that would be one very brilliant way of simplifying things. That would also create a framework in which indeed we can, for example, learn lessons from what works in European member states and what maybe should be spread and implemented on a much broader scale. If we look at the separate EPR schemes going on in the separate member states, you can really see today which ones in which waste streams, whether it be plastics, whether it be or some others, which ones perform, which ones have the numbers, which ones even collect the numbers. And those are not necessarily all in one member state. Although being a Belgian, I have to say that we are pretty good at most of them. But we are not the only ones, and we are definitely not perfect in all of them. And so I think we should take this opportunity to look at, and I hope that the panels will also offer a window on that, to look at what does work and what we can maybe put as a model in place to learn from and to indeed make an effort and a project of doing a 1 in and 27 out when we talk about such things as EPR schemes, when we talk about such things as labeling, when we talk about such things as organizing waste streams and opening borders for cross-border transport, because that will be a huge facilitating exercise. It would also indeed create a framework in which can justify export bans and keeping materials in Europe, because we know where they will be going and what we will be producing with them and what we will be offering. So I think that I'm very much looking forward to any kind of suggestions coming out of the panels. And now the second bit, apart from harmonization, and that's going to be my last idea to put into this group for the discussion, is indeed a lot more data, a lot more monitoring, with the objective of also not just making rules but also enforcing them. Enforcing, if you have an export ban, you need to enforce it. Enforcing, if you have collection targets, make sure you achieve them. Enforcing in the sense that you have comparable results. and comparable quality-controlled waste streams that we know where they go, we know where they end up, we know where the expertise is, and we know what we can do with them and where we can create markets and where it is useful to put those instruments in place. I think there's a lot of wins to be made in many European member states, and I think that the role of the European Union would indeed have to be to make sure that we standardize that collection of information and that we make sure that those who indeed make an effort to get collection going also are guaranteed that there will be an enforcement and a validation of the work they are doing. And then one last point, let's not lose sight, and Manuela also already mentioned it, let's not lose sight of the fact that this is not just about, or should not just be about recycling. It is different from one waste stream to another, obviously, but there is definitely a lot of ground to be made and some good examples in at least one or two member states about indeed implementing clear principles and clear ambitions on reuse and repair. And again, in some waste streams, such as in WEEE, it is probably a lot easier to do and to put into practice than it is in single-use plastics. But let's learn those lessons, let's bring those data to the surface, and let's justify the models that we put forward as ways to work on that European materials independence, on that economic resilience, on building those new economic activities and new industrial operators in this field, and at the same time indeed creating not only a more profitable but mostly a better society that takes more care of what it takes out of the earth and does not put it in too soon again, but uses it to its maximum to make sure that we justify what we take out, because that should be the moral principle that we aim to achieve. So I leave it to the two moderators of the two panels now. I am very much looking forward to the results. I will sadly not be able, which is why I got the chance to do this, to put my own ideas forward first, to stay for both of the panels, but I am definitely looking forward to the results. Thank you very much for being here, and I wish you all a very interesting evening.
Thank you very much. Now I will hand over to Sirpa, and I would like to ask all the panelists from the first panel to come up here and to sit next to Sirpa.
Thank you. And here we have two excellent colleagues. It's easy to continue after you. A lot of intellectual capacity in this area and even more commitment. And let me be assured that we do have a lot of colleagues that are working on this direction. And so it is a question how we join our forces and continue this work. Okay, then going on the topic. Let me introduce the panelists, and before getting them the floor, I'll just very briefly lay out a couple of the words. Firstly, we have William Neal, a known person from quite some time, working for resource efficiency, circular economy, and now you are serving as an advisor for circular economy and DG Envy. And Dow, a lot of interesting ideas for a long time in this area. Jimena Kanda from Dow, Joachim Quoden from External Producer Responsibility Alliance, Fernando Rodriguez Mata, New Reuse Alliance, Karina Gruka, Inga Group, and Antoine Auger from Institute for European Environmental Policy. A lot of wholeheartedly welcome, a lot of wealth of understanding and ideas in this area. Well, briefly, a couple of my comments in the area. This Circular Economy Act is not a small step. I'm always very worried when people say, let's take it cautiously. We have taken 20 years cautious steps. And guess what? We are around 10% of effective circularity in EU. Lot of ideas, lot of attempts. And the question here is, Why does it not fly? And then I think that we should make this as an ambitious framework legislation of use of resources. Not more, not less. And in this framework legislation, let's say on the main part of it, sort of the mother legislation should be laid the principles like precautionary principle, the actions to be up to the challenge within the planetary boundaries, targets maybe, but that's a bit hard. I understand we might actually do bad for the good if we set the targets too low. It is all materials to be repurposed. It's design out of the waste. It is cascading use and waste hierarchy of the materials. It is timely available data across the whole life cycle and other principles like that. That would then directly be guiding principles in all different bits and pieces of legislation, because we'll soon hear it, but probably this is not only one piece of the legislation. And then what we are doing today's panel is from the preparation to understand, identify what are the obstacles for the businesses. Why the business doesn't fly? Why don't you get the investment? Why don't you get the markets? Why don't you get the ball rolling? And what are the incentives that are needed to get really the actions going? And there, already referred by Manuela, we need very tight, close cooperation and understanding how to make it work. And in the working group number 1, there was a lot of ideas: VAT harmonization, extended producer responsibility schemes, eco-modulation with EPR fees, digital product passport, but what kind of a passport? There's different models on there. Simplified waste shipment, leveraging public procurement. And the only thing I would like to add here as this kind of a testing ball is that why wouldn't we use the internal market and create, instead of fighting over what is end of the waste criteria, we never get anywhere, to create the new class with the definition materials to be repurposed. And then voila, the regulation, the framework would be ready there. It's easy, isn't it? And then is of course thinking the public procurement, but Bruno talked about that already. So with these sort of incentives, now the floor is yours. Could I ask you, Roland, to show a bit of the white paper, because I'm not sure I can follow the time. So you would be sort of jumping here if we go over time. And William, why won't you start?
Fully equipped. Timekeeper. You press it after 5 minutes, it becomes orange, and then you press it again, and it'll start again.
How does it work? Is it recycled content?
So you want me to start over?
Yeah.
Yes? Well, thank you very much. Thanks to Globe, particularly to Roland-Jan, for all the hard work and for the invitation and for the recommendations. You were asking why we're not flying yet. I can maybe come on to that in a bit, but I think we're maybe on the runway. But somebody outside, when we were waiting to get into the room, was asking me, well, do you think the Commission is going in the right direction? And I think that we are, but there are probably several directions that we should be going in. We've, as you said, I mean, we've been working on waste management for many years. We've followed that road or that flight path. We've moved along the flight path of product design, not only with eco-design regulation, but also with packaging, with end-of-life vehicles, with batteries. And I mean, a lot of the formerly waste legislation has really incorporated design aspects for it. And we're really on the single market flight path now, which is a very powerful instrument at European level, both in terms of placing products on the market, and really having a possibility to say what shouldn't be on the market, what are the worst things. But also in terms of freeing up the flows, the stocks and flows of materials and products and circular products within the single market and reducing frictions. So the Circular Economy Act, we're rather dealing with the latter. We're talking a lot about freeing up flows, trying to target some of the bottlenecks in the functioning of the single market for circular products and materials. As Bruno said, you're a bit in the dark about what's in it. I can't say what's going to be in it unless if you want to sign a non-disclosure agreement. But, I mean, in the end, I don't even really know because it has to go through a regulatory scrutiny board on the basis of our impact assessment, and then it has to go through the collegial decision-making process, and then we give it to you and the co-legislators. So what it will turn out like in a couple of years, we'll have to see. But of course, as always, the Commission proposals are beautifully crafted and well impact assessed and based on public consultations, which I think many of you have been very active in. But we have to say that the Circular Economy Act is part of a much bigger picture. It is adding itself to a lot of existing legislation. And, I mean, I think the European Green Deal, of course, we brought in a lot of legislation, much of it linked to single market. And one of the reasons that we're not flying is I think that most of that was basically framework legislation, and what will really bite is the delegated acts and implementing acts when we actually have product requirements. So I think the needles will start to shift. But of course, we need to go through that process of actually implementing those regulations. We're also building on legislation which needs proper enforcement, and we have many rules which are already very relevant to what we're going to do in the Circular Economy Act. For example, on illegal landfills, we have targets for waste recycling and so on, and we need to make sure that those are properly implemented. And the Circular Economy Act will also be in a context of flanking measures, both existing and potentially future ones, whether they are economic incentives. We're seeing ETS coming in for incineration, for example. We could see VAT, circular VAT initiatives. We may see flanking measures in relation to public procurement. I mean, we've got the public procurement directives under revision next year related to state aid guidelines and so on. And also flanking measures related to investment. We saw a few weeks ago the EIB publishing a report saying that the circular investment gap is 82 billion per annum, which I think is also on a fairly non-ambitious way forward. So we need to incentivise that investment, and we need to make sure that also it's not being too restricted by borders, and we need to work on things like trans-regional circularity hubs to actually get some scale, particularly in smaller countries and regions where that's not the case. So we need to get investors together, public and private. So all of those flanking things, they won't necessarily be in the Circular Economy Act, but if they're not, it doesn't mean that they won't happen. I'm trying to say that the Circular Economy Act might be a bit circumscribed, but it will not be the only thing that's happening. Why are markets important for circular economy? I think this is important. I mean, in the Circular Economy Act, we're very much looking at getting the markets to work using the single market. Waste is a resource in the wrong place, and circularity is all about trying to keep things at their maximum value. And markets are the best, well, they're the only really effective way of making sure that things get to where they have the most value. And if there are impediments to that, then if that's not happening, then we're not achieving circularity. So this is why markets are important. That's why the Circular Economy Act will focus on tackling some of those bottlenecks. Not only, we're also specifically looking at how we can recover more critical raw materials. We're looking at how we can boost demand in certain areas, but a lot of it is related to getting the markets working. And for that to happen, of course, we need legal clarity. You mentioned end of waste. This is one area where we're hoping to provide extra clarity. But also, I think some of the things we've already done. I mean, a lot of the directives that we've had, we've changed into regulations, and that should mean that these are now, the rules are directly applicable to economic actors, and we won't get so much interpretation by member states of the rules. Does this mean I'm now with 2 minutes to go, or?
Yep.
Okay. I said that laws are important, regulations are important, very important for giving confidence to investors and making sure that the markets are fair. But also a very big part of that is effective market surveillance. And that's to ensure compliance on the one hand, but also and to make sure that those that are doing the right thing aren't undercut by unfair practices. But also to eliminate free riders, as we see, particularly with distance selling, for example, not paying into EPR schemes. And I think for this we need, I think one of the most fundamental things that we need is proper resourcing of market surveillance by member states. That brings me on to a more general point, which I think is important, which is who does what. And what we can do at European level must be complemented by what happens at national level, what happens at regional level, in municipalities and also in the private sector. And the Court of Auditors produced a report in 2023, which I often quote, which basically said, well done EU, everything going nicely, moving fast. Member states need to do more, A, in implementing what is being adopted at European level, but B, they need to take care of what is in their competence and what we can't do or shouldn't really be done or can't be done effectively at European level. And I think also the member states have a very important part to play in directing public investment into the right places and leveraging private investment. At the European level, we have a lot of work just to implement at the moment. As I say, I think we have about 190 implementing and delegated acts coming out of the Green Deal legislation. So we're pretty busy, even if that sort of work isn't as sexy and as visible as some of the things that we're putting in front of the co-legislators. Everybody's talking about the Circular Economy Act, but a lot of the work that we're now doing on batteries, packaging, end-of-life vehicles and so on, or we'll soon be doing on end-of-life vehicles, is going to be very time-consuming but very effective. Maybe just say a last point, which is talking about the directions that we go. I think that maybe at European level, one thing that we really need to put more attention on is what we call slowing the loop. And here we've talked about reuse and refurbishment, remanufacturing and so on. We certainly need to incentivise those kind of business practices. That's something where I think outside of the circular economy policy bubble, people don't really instinctively think of that. But if we're talking about things like strategic autonomy, if we're talking about trying to reduce our reliance on imports of certain materials, it's not just about recycling. What you don't waste, you don't have to replace. And I think that is very difficult to get across. I think all the help that we can get in trying to get that argument across would be very helpful. I'll leave it there and maybe come back if I have the chance. Thank you.
Thank you, William. And for the sake of time, when I noticed it's running, okay, won't start it yet. I didn't introduce all of our speakers, but please do refer and check their bios. They all have wealth of experience in this area. And now I would leave the floor to Jimena, please.
Yes. Can I have the ticking bomb?
Yeah.
Check it. Hola, hola. Yeah, okay. Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here in GlobeEU. As I think Sirpa and I once discussed, for me, GlobeEU is a space to think. I don't think we have enough time to actually think anymore because we're rushed with things. So I always appreciate the opportunity and the debates that we have with different stakeholders. So thank you for that. Dow, for those who don't know, it's a material science company. We have multiple manufacturing sites, around 25 manufacturing sites here in Europe. and we manufacture basic chemicals for multiple supply chains, packaging, construction, automotive, consumer solutions, and some others. And for us, circularity is one of our main areas of work. And we do believe it has a role to play in conversations on decarbonization. So I will speak a bit on circularity, but I will also invite you all to think this in the broader context of things. Okay, let's be honest, I'm going to be very politically not correct, but I think the situation demands not politically correct opinions. We have been operating in a linear, fossil-based economy for a very long time, over 100 years of an economy that is run on fuels, on fossil fuels. At Dow and the chemical industry, we operate on fossil-based materials. But we believe that decarbonization it's critical, and circular economy has a role to play, not just to address the waste at the end of life. So as a solution to waste from an environmental standpoint in the last step of the value chain, of the first value chain, but also as a new raw material, an alternative raw material to the current fossil-based materials that we have. So I really invite you to think of waste as a raw material and not at the end of the first value chain, but at the first step of a new value chain, in the case where we can think it as that. The challenge is the transition. How do we go from over 100 years of linear fossil-based economy into a circular alternative-based economy? And there's an element of optimization of resources here as well. And there's an element as well on legal frameworks, because of course the legal frameworks sometimes were thought for a different economy. And now we're trying to build a different economy on frameworks that were not designed for that. And that's normal and that's natural. So that's why discussions like this are so critical. How do we create an environment where we can really enable business models in a circularity perspective? The good thing is that, again, maybe politically not correct, but guys, industry has a role to play. Industry has a say in this. We need industry to keep innovating and to keep developing things and building business models out of new ways of thinking the economy. It's a critical part of the debate. And for that, typically you think on supply and demand. How do we transition to a circular economy? From the demand side, there's a lot of different policy frameworks that are helping on the demand side. Mandatory recycled content in packaging, in cars, in bottles, hopefully in other stuff via ESPR soon to come. So this is something that really helps create demand for alternative materials and also helps justify investments developing those materials, which are typically more expensive than the virgin ones. Eco-modulation of EPR fees, where you can incentivize the uptake of more circular solutions and design for recycling solutions. Incentives, digital passports, information to consumers. Let's talk to consumers transparently and credibly on the sustainability of products. But because this is Circular Economy Act, I want to focus on the supply side, which is what we hope we will see in Circular Economy Act. We hope to see more harmonization of EPR schemes. EPRs work, they help, they should be expanded to more products, but we cannot have 27 different EPR schemes. It breaks the single market. Eco-modulation should be also harmonized, so we don't have to produce product for one country and then a different one from another to get the incentive that we need. Harmonization of end of waste. You may have heard this before. It sounds almost ridiculous. Guys, moving something from one European country to another European country is very difficult because there's no harmonization of end of waste. One country thinks they're sending product, the other country thinks they're receiving waste. They request different paperwork, the truck goes back, and it delays the whole process months and months and months just because they don't understand the same on how to classify the material. We need a better understanding on what is a waste and what is a product, or at least we need the same understanding of what is a waste and what is a product. Shipment of waste within the EU, especially plastic waste, mixed plastic waste, for example, is being treated as if it was hazardous waste, when you can actually recover that and recycle that. But it's so hard to move that it remains in the place of origin. we still are seeing a lot of plastic waste, for example, going to incineration and landfill. That's not the best use of that material. You can totally recover it and make something new out of it. And we're seeing a lot of discussions on the calculation rules for these recycled content targets. These are also critical. My point here is that all of these decisions go to the cost of the model. The more complicated it is, the most costly it is to really build a business out of this. So we really hope to see rules that are really thought to help use waste as a new raw material. At Dow, we have solutions in packaging, in mattresses, in car seats, to really use recycled materials into that. But of course, it's not just about recycling. We have different solutions connected to optimization of material, basically using less to get the same or better performance, making things more durable, like slowing the loops. Like there's different solutions that contribute to circularity and overall decarbonization. The more you optimize resources, the less you need to manufacture and produce and emit. So we really are happy to see Circular Economy Act. We think it could help on the supply side of things. If done right, it could help create that environment that we need as companies to have an investment case, because today there is no investment case for circularity. There are some streams where it's really complicated to scale because there are so many hurdles and barriers to really make a business out of it, which we understand. Again, frameworks are new. We're all adapting. We really hope circularity can really help drive innovation, scale innovation, get innovation to market. There's a lot of innovation that stays in the lab. We can actually do things. It's just that we cannot go to market with it. There's no business model to go to market with it. So I think it's critical that we all keep thinking together on how we create enabling conditions for circular materials, with recycling as one of the many options, but also thinking on the role that it plays in the decarbonization discussion, because it really helps develop alternative feedstocks to the current use of fuel-based that we have today. So I'll stop here. I'll thank again GlobalEU. I think again the opportunity to speak as industry players in the upstream. We really are excited about what's coming. We're really excited about keep thinking and innovating and creating new materials out of waste-based feedstocks. We really hope we can scale and increase the circularity that today, unfortunately, is not there. So thank you.
Thank you, Jimena. And now I would pass the floor to Joachim.
Thanks a lot as well for inviting me, and especially as you are the front runners, the front singers in all these topics, and I really hope that you will be able to steer and influence the discussion in the Parliament and with the other European institutions. Because there is a big opportunity with the Circular Economy Act for EPR. But I have to combine it with a very big if. Extended producer responsibility can work. We have 5, 6, 7 countries with different models, but they show what can be achieved. We talk about eco-modulation. Most of the front runners have eco-modulation. Work on reuse, prevention. Most of the front runners, or some of the front runners, work with prevention and reuse. So we see what is possible if the system is well designed. So that's why I think the Commission said we will cut the minimum requirements for EPR out of the Waste Framework Directive somehow, make them better and make them a regulation, because up to now it's a directive. So a lot of freedom to the member states. But we have wonderful minimum requirements for EPR. I don't know whether someone has looked into Article 8A. I think in 2018 the Commission prepared a fantastic proposal. Most of it agreed by the Parliament and the member states. But the problem is, since then, no one cares. Since 2018, we have the minimum requirements. And then if you compare how many member states have implemented them, and then I'm getting sarcastic from time to time. I'm really sorry. 2 member states don't care about EPR at all. They tell you we will never change our taxation system. So what are we talking about harmonization? There are rules that companies should be treated in the same way. So translated, for the same packaging you should pay the same fee. So not the big polluters pay less than the small polluters. But then go to half of the member states. If you are a big guy, you pay less than the small guys. It's for competition reasons. So the minimum requirements are not applicable. So this is, for me, I'm very sorry, this is the key question before we discuss how to improve it. I would need, if I would have the possibility to ask the 27 member states, before we discuss, will we get an agreement of 27? If we agree on 10 new rules, will all follow them? Because if we don't get this agreement, we should just stop to talk about harmonization, because we will never achieve it. That is for me the most important point. Will we agree on these few new minimum requirements? It do not need to be a lot, but if we agree on them, everybody has to implement it, so that not a taxation country can say, oh, sorry, earmarking. No, not possible. It goes in the budget, and then we will see what is happening with the money. Or if we say transparency, how the money is used, how the material is flowing. No, we cannot do this because we have a competitive system. Everything is a business secret. So for me, the first thing is we do new rules, but then everybody has to follow them. And then we can do the earmarking. I think it is important that we ensure that the money is not ending up in a black hole, that those who are paying the bill, that the consumers who are doing the extra work of sorting, that they know that the money is spent in the right way. I think this is very important also to improve all the systems. And we have several examples where such a transparency can be seen. And there were some studies in the last weeks of European and in Italy and from Germany where certain things like transparency, earmarking, fee modulation and so on are found to be the basic for a good system. So let's agree on just a few topics, and then I think we can really improve our systems in a great way. And if we have a well-functioning system, we can expand it to new tasks. So going away from waste management only to work more on prevention, eventually on reuse as well. But if we expand it now and we still have countries in the chaos, I cannot imagine how this will work with new jobs and new tasks. So that's why follow the best practices. We have the best practices. I don't know how to convince some of the member states to make some easy changes. We have Slovenia, just one great example. They understood that their competitive systems are out of control, so they decided to move to a single service system. This was challenged to the European Court of Justice, and the European Court of Justice said, of course this is possible. EPR is a service of general economic interest, so of public interest, and then you can do this. So it is possible, but we need a little bit of backbone and will to do it. And then I think we can be very successful. And my association, we are offering all the information and best practices, and hopefully you will do the best out of it then. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Joachim. And then we'll move to Fernando from New Reuse Alliance.
Thank you, Sirpa. Thank you, GloveEU, Roland-Jan, and everyone else for the invitation. Indeed, representing New European Reuse Alliance, we are a network of businesses that already provide reusable solutions in the case of in the sector of packaging, and we know that reuse is completely possible, technologically wise, feasible, but we need the right incentives in place so we can compete against single use. Bruno mentioned in the case of electrical and electronic equipment, the value is in there. There is an intrinsic value, right, on many of these products. For packaging, is very cheap. I mean, we've been, since the early 90s, in the 80s, we were bombarded with single use because it's so cheap that reuse systems have difficulties to compete with such cheap feedstock, and the reality is that there is definitely a new economic and environment business case to build, and also social, because a lot of companies in reuse also provide social inclusiveness to include people that have difficulties to access to jobs. So we are building a more sustainable work, and by the way, reuse is nothing at all new. The old people here will remember that 30, 40 years ago, reuse systems existed for different packaging streams, like glass for milk and many other drinks. So this is something that has existed, and by the way, in some countries it never disappeared, like in Germany. In Germany, for example, for beer, 70% of the beers come in reusable formats, 40% for the whole beverages, and the reason why is it's economic as well. There's an economic attractiveness in pushing the systems when the right incentives and legal frameworks are in place. So my message here today is for companies and policymakers also to think when they are going to regulate that reuse should be your first circular economy choice. When we talk about circular economy, reuse should be at the forefront of your decisions when it comes to designing products, thinking the processes and the end of life, of course. It's all about extending the resources, because all of the reasons we've been saying here, we are facing challenges from all sides, and the single market needs to keep the resources in the loop to be more resilient and have more strategic autonomy vis-a-vis all the threats we are having from different regions in the world. So I think we have already a good legislative basis to work on. Indeed, William, I totally agree that if we were already enforcing and implementing 100% of that legislation, we would be in a much better place. Yet we need indeed to provide the right resources to market surveillance authorities to make sure that the EU legislation applies, not in theory but in practice, across the 27 member states. And I definitely think we will all agree here that we have some laying foundations with targets that we have been working on for a long time in different segments. Packaging, we had the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive already dating back from 1994, which focused first on recycling, and now with the new regulation setting out some reuse targets, finally. So we've moved from incineration, recycling, and now putting the focus on reuse, which is good, yet much more to be done. But beyond targets, we also need to find the right enabling economic conditions that will make reuse systems to compete in kind of level playing field with single use. So for that, we see the Circular Economy Act and sister legislation like the Public Procurement Directive, which is currently being reviewed, definitely the instruments required to push this forward, to enable the environment that will help scale reuse systems, because we need the scale, the volumes, to make it also economically competitive. And so I want to focus first on the public procurement section. We think that there should be mandatory circular economy requirements focused on reuse, repair, refurbishment of products and services integrated in public procurement rules at the European level, so member states can create this demand, because at the end public procurement has been a market, early market creator in some areas, like electric fleet vehicles. In many cities we saw already, when I was a kid, I remember in my city we had these electric buses which were very new, and now we see them much more. So public procurement and public markets really push demand at the beginning when there's maybe not yet so much eagerness from private investment. So definitely private procurement needs to be there. Remains underused tool. We have some examples in Germany and France. I often cited one iconic case, which was the Olympic Games of Paris in 2024. Their procurement was really focused on making as much reuse, refurbishment and repair as possible. But that should not be just an iconic case, that should be the norm. And that's what we should be looking for, get inspired by these examples and roll it out all over Europe. Secondly, we need also fiscal incentives. VAT has been mentioned, definitely can be a way as well to reduce the price of second-hand goods, repair services, reuse products, which obviously will help the business case. I'm not going to get into the details of reviewing the VAT directive because it requires some process in there, but definitely there is a path to explore regarding how to either extend, reduce, or zero VATs to these kind of products and services, or exempt them as well on second hand, because already those products in a way were already VAT in the first place, to incentivize this sustainable production and consumption. I think companies are eager and consumers are eager to move to that more circular, but they have to get the accessibility and the offer there, because, for example, we now see the largest scale reuse system for retail in France, being piloted by one EPR, and consumers are demanding more and more, but the brands are still hesitating, so definitely the investment gap that has been mentioned before is needed to create this legal certainty so companies can go to the next level. And also, I think we need to consider when it comes about having a single market and competing against other regions in the world about the state aid. State aid rules may need to be reviewed as well to see how we're talking about now made in Europe criteria, how we can foster the production, the service that European companies are already innovating with and are already available, to push them and have this more level playing field. So in general, the market favors and prioritizes European products and companies that are making in Europe the products or services. So definitely Circular Economy Act will be an enabler if it focuses on the right enabling conditions. So we think that public procurement, taxes, and also, although it's not mainly the main target today, but EPR, of reuse, but Joaquin, you mentioned reuse should also be integrated in EPR as a way to foster these more circular practices. We have the case of France with 5% of EPR systems and deposit return systems that are mandated to invest in reuse with at least 5% of the budget. So we think that's creating really a good ecosystem to invest in reuse. Over 250 million have been invested since 2023 in France, only for the packaging sector. All sectors are implied by this legislation. So we see definitely a huge dynamism and eagerness to go beyond. So definitely we need to look in other member states what's happening as well and try to Europe take not the minimum common denominator, but try to go beyond and create the basic rules that are ambitious for making Europe the leader in circular economy, which we may be today, but as you said, CIRPA 10% is definitely far beyond from where we want to be.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. And so thank you, Fernando. And then we move to Inga Group and Karina. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sirpa. Thank you also GlobeEU and of course Roland-Jan for having me here today. So you might know Inca Group as IKEA. We are the largest retailer operating under franchisee agreement with Inter-IKEA Group. We are present in 31 markets globally and 22 markets in the EU. And today I wanted to share a little bit our experience with circular business models. And of course, as we are the retailer, we are very close to the consumer. And we launch our circular practices such as buyback and secondhand in our IKEA stores in 2020 in all the 22 EU markets. Before that, we did a small pilot project in 2016, and we saw that it was very well received by the consumers, hence the full rollout. And as we launched into the circular business models, we quickly saw that it comes with huge investments from the company side in infrastructure, simply the circular infrastructure. And just to give you a little bit of an idea, we had to invest firstly in digital system that will help us review the products and actually know how we should price them. Also, how do we put them online and make sure that they're visible. The other thing that we had to do is hire a full recovery team and train it. So these are the people who basically make sure that the furniture that we buy back from customers, that all the screws are well placed, that there is nothing wrong, because we really value safety of our consumers. And of course, we also have the cleaning and sanitization systems in place. So even if you decide to buy, let's say, a sofa, it will be properly cleaned in our stores. So these are all the investments that we had to make this possible. And of course, there is a huge demand. The consumers are very interested, especially that it lies very closely to our general idea that we provide furniture to as many people as possible for little price. Nevertheless, the volumes are still very low and the margin on our side is very limited. And so we see that the challenge doesn't necessarily come from the fact that the consumers are not interested or that they're not willing to buy secondhand. It more comes from the economic conditions. So on our side, we would really hope that Circular Economy Act could become this lever and support the circular business models. And we would hope for different financial incentives, whether that's the removal of VAT or reduction of VAT. And also in case of the reduction of VAT, it's something that already exists today. It's part of the VAT directive that was implemented in 2008. And it allows for a margin scheme. So basically, when we buy back a product from a consumer, let's say it's a Billy bookcase that the majority of you might know, if, let's say, we buy it and we sell it, we can only pay the tax based on the margin. And the directive mentions that there are two ways of calculating that, either the global method, where you just take all the products that you sold and put them all together and calculate the general margin altogether, or you do it product per product. And this is not an issue. Let's say like it's okay to have either or. Of course, the easiest solution for us is the globalization method, because we can just simply put them all together and calculate. But the problem that we have seen is actually that the member states, for example, don't allow margin scheme for furniture. So it's only allowed for certain things like electronics or different types of products, but not necessarily furniture. So we struggle with that in Spain, in Sweden, also in the Netherlands. Now not so much, but before it was the case in the Netherlands. So the two biggest are Spain and Sweden, and these are huge markets for us where we sell a lot of secondhand, but we cannot apply the margin scheme. Italy is also a problematic country because they want us to have like a full digital system that would put a special number on the receipt. And in order to have that, we would have to fully change the system, which would be very expensive. So again, another country where we cannot apply the margin scheme. And in some countries like Czech Republic, Germany, and a few other markets, we have the ceiling of 500 euros. So as you can imagine, for us, where we have quite a lot of furniture to offer in our stores, the ceiling of 500 euros margin is quite ridiculous. So I think if the reduction of VAT is the road, we really need the harmonization of whether that's the margin scheme or whatever method that could be applied, because as it is today, it's just simply very hard for us to operate and provide the second-hand and at the same time be profitable. And I think that from the perspective of circular business model, the consumers really want it. They ask for it. We also invested in the infrastructure, so the infrastructure is there. But we are just simply missing some policy incentive that would really allow us to scale it into even next level and, of course, make it possible to grow beyond just what we have today. So that's a little bit from our side. Thank you.
Thank you, Karina, for bringing up some concrete proposals, example the VAT, and some obstacles too. And then Antoine, Institute for European Environmental Policy.
Thank you very much, Sirpa. Thank you very much, GlobeEU, for the kind invitation. A lot has been said already, covering many different aspects of the issues and challenges that we're facing. So I'll try to avoid duplication, but there are really three main points that I wanted to emphasize in this today. I wanted to first to start with what William has mentioned at the very first, that we are more and more into the implementation of higher waste hierarchy legislation. So that's a definitive sign of progress, and this should be recognized. But it also brings in its own challenges. And now, this has been said already quite a bit, so apologies for that, but we need to emphasize, we need to ensure harmonization across the board. Otherwise, this higher waste hierarchy, this flurry of new legislation and so on, will encounter many, many issues when we come to the implementation stage, or where we're already there. Whether EPR related, whether end of waste related, and so on. This is absolutely key and necessitate political capital to be dedicated to it. Otherwise, unfortunately, we might end up with more problems that we had at the beginning. It's absolutely key for practitioners who will actually be the ones that be implementing, navigating, or enforcing the rules. We were discussing before in the rooms, those who were actually there to enforce, the judges, the lawyers, and so on, that needs this kind of clarity. The investors, obviously, that need that kind of clarity to make their decisions. And I'm just passing over everyone else. Just in case, as a matter of principle also, is a question also of good governance, to have that sort of thinking ahead of a harmonization of how that new rule would fit into the bigger picture. Otherwise, we element more confusion. Here, I'm sorry, but I cannot stop pointing out the attempt to deal with some of the EPR aspects, for instance, in the context of an omnibus, which is not so impact assessed as others, may have created a bit of confusion. So perhaps that's one example again but at the end of the day, a way to emphasize the need for this harmonization to be taken seriously by all levels of the policy-making world. Because otherwise, I don't think it's easier for the Commission either when every other legislator start I wouldn't say meddling, but let's say providing their interpretation. Exactly, democratic process. The second point I wanted to discuss really relates to the notion of market intervention. You've mentioned also, William, that we're on the single market flight path, which is extremely good. This is our main asset, the single market, quite clearly. We are all hoping for a two-pronged approach for a competitive circular economy, something that makes circular economy business models competitive and so on and so forth, something that works on the supply and on the demand, on the public side and on the private side, eventually to steer the market forward. But this is extraordinarily challenging. Now we have recycled content targets across the board. We have the digital product passport that's coming in with some criteria and methodologies for the placement on the single market and so on. This comes into major issues because for the EU it's usually very, very hard to actually do proper market intervention. It's not the easiest thing to do in such a fragmented world and with all of these different member states that we have. So how all of these new interventions, for instance, the Circular Economy Act, others, how these recycled content targets, for instance, to take as an example, will work with the Waste Shipment Directive? How will they work with the trade intervention that are planned, whether the fees on export of aluminium scraps, for instance, or on the steel quotas that are being implemented around? And eventually, this is, I think, one of the things that's coming is how will it relate to the Made in EU type of criteria? Now, the genius is out of the bottle on Made in EU. It's there now in one legislative proposal. I think it's safe to say that it will come up again in the legislative process in the years to come. How will that interact with recycled content criteria? Is a linear material made in the EU be favored over a recycled content made anywhere? This, I'm not saying it's easy, and of course Made in EU brings in a whole lot of complexity. It should be based on environmental assessment and qualitative assessment and so on. But this is really, there are some interactions in there that in terms of market intervention will make the whole thing extremely challenging for the European Commission and other institutions. Last but not least, last point, and I'm very sorry, I'm going to come back to it. It's not the first time. I know that there is no little political appetite to it. But when we are facing these challenges on harmonizations, on market interventions and so on, I still believe that sort of overarching concepts structuring the regulatory progress is needed. And when we miss that, we we have to acknowledge that our environmental situation is not just a climate crisis. It links to a triple planetary crisis. It links to impact on nature. It leads to pollution. And at the end of the day, it's about our consumption of resources. And if we want to scale our capacity to decrease our material consumption, that at the end of the day, we need a coherent framework that is capped by an overarching, and I'm going to say the word, target. And again, I take the example of climate to work around the triple planetary crisis. So climate law works. This is one of our greatest successes. The trajectory of emissions is on path to reach its objectives. It's an overarching objective with a target that is essentially then deployed through sectoral legislation and so on. And arguably not perfect, but it works to a large extent. So why not conceive a resource law that would actually do the same and help us climb the waste hierarchy? Because at the end of the day, this is a reduce right from the start. It helps making the front runners competitive, because it will eventually structure the market. And it will consider also broader concepts such as efficiency gains that have been mentioned. This will also be met under the same overarching concept. So it's not just about circularity, it's also about efficiency. So I'm just putting it out there. I think this is something that needs to be considered now or later, now in the circular economy or later, but I think we're in the dire need of consistency, harmonization, structure in this debate, eventually to have markets progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Joachim. And what worries me, this is a promise also, is that we are probably making a legislation for 10 or 20 years. And if we fail and we restart with the next commission, we are going to lose at least 10 years of investment and actions. So we need to get it right. And that is not easy, let's be frank, in this political climate. So what can we do? And that's why I was thinking of this framework legislation point, where you would just sort of put it in concrete, some of the principles, and none of them are new, like precautionary principle or end of the waste criteria, do no significant harm, and others. And then the other point, I'm a bit hesitant about the state aid because it's getting out of the hands anyway. But the public procurement, I hope that you all stay very alert, because there's a lot of member states and also in Parliament political pressures. This is going to be by European Act. And that would mean anything that is European goes first. That is the default option. That's why already some member states stopped buying Chinese electric buses, and you didn't get them in Europe. So what happened is you preferred diesel buses. And the coal is European too. And many problematic issues are European too. And so if we strip this down, as there are the pressures with the simplification, what we hear, to buy European, we might be doing more bad than good. So it would need to have this sort of a environmental green deal, digitalization, justification, and then it should be, of course, the default option. But this is going to be an uphill battle. I don't know how it is felt in Commission. But we are a bit late, but we just talked with Roland that we can sort of squeeze a couple of minutes out of the refreshment. It's not hot anyway here, for momentarily. I promise next week it's going to be. And I would ask you to raise hands for the questions or comments. And while you are thinking of those, I would prepare our commentators panelists to comment each other or pose questions or comments on what you have been hearing, and some of maybe new, fresh ideas also, because as we heard from Jimena, the Global EU's idea is to think, and now it is the time to think how to get this right. So do I see any hands? Yes, please. And could you please introduce yourself so we know all of the people can know who you are.
Thank you. And thank you for all the speakers. Very interesting. Of course, in some ways, when you listen to all the different presentations or speeches, one could easily say that, yes, there is a lot in common, and the harmonization probably, or the single market, or no matter which way you look at it, is at the core. There is a need, and it makes absolute sense, I think, also for the sake of the EU to move on quickly. There is a big need to rapidly find the right design, and as Sirpa said, we cannot get it wrong. So the question would be, to get it right, what do you see as main ingredients? And also coming back to the final part, by EU, as has also been mentioned, other than by Sirpa, can it become then an enemy of circularity and therefore a priority which would overrule, or can we see by EU being compatible with something in the circularity by EU waste, don't buy waste from elsewhere, as an example, to extend it a bit, but that's just a silly thought. So how would you see the way forward if there would be a free choice to put the pieces together quickly?
And if the panelists are okay with that, I'll pick a couple of other questions at the same time. So we'll go one round of comments, and then you have a time to quickly pick up your coffee or mineral water or whatever. Yes, please.
Yes, so I just had a question with regards to what Mr. Torback was mentioning and the fact that we needed a lot more data and monitoring to enforce the legislation. And then William was talking about really, it was really crucial to have effective market surveillance. Is the Commission looking into this sort of thing? You know, if we look at the SUP directive at the time, there was supposed to be a report by the member state with regards to the efforts they were making and potential targets and how they were reducing their single-use plastic. Is it something that the Commission is thinking within the Circular Economy Act in specific areas, potentially?
And yes, please, we can pick up the third, and then I'll close the Q part of A.
Hi, Eline Boon, Ella MacArthur Foundation. It was more in the spirit of this being to think together, and some of the things I missed representing an international organization is how do we avoid creating an island for circular economy within Europe. Europe doesn't stand alone in the world. I think it's fair to say that geopolitics at the moment are not, I'm not sure if this is me. Every time I speak,
could someone on the line, someone has mic open, could you please shut it down so it's easier to discuss here? Thank you very much.
Yeah, it was just how do we avoid that Europe becomes an island for circular economy given the current geopolitical climate? How do we, for example, look into trade agreements? How do we look into using, for example, GSERA, G7, G20, the networks that do exist? How can we make sure that we also agree on circular economy standards? So, we don't create the island. And it's more of a high-end question to think together because I think it's very important we don't forget that Europe doesn't stand alone. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I'll move to our panelists, if that is okay. William, we'll go in the same order. William, could you start, and then to Jimena and so forth.
Right, thank you. I mean, on data gaps, what's been interesting is that we've realised how little data we have, or how little useful data we have. If you start saying, OK, we want to put in recycled content requirement or public procurement requirements to boost demand for something, but you don't know how much capacity there is to produce that something or whether the waste streams are there, then there's two things that can happen. Either the prices shoot up because there's the extra demand but there's no supply, or that gap is filled by imports. So, I mean, we saw this with photovoltaics 20 years ago when in Germany, had the feed-in tariffs and tried to boost demand for solar panels, and they all came in from China, and it wasn't really the intended consequence. So we have to be very careful. I mean, that's also very relevant for Made in Europe, the discussion that we had. But we realised that we asked the member states, we asked the recycling associations, we asked lots of people, give us data, tell us, but for every material stream, it's very different as well. And this brings me on to another thing which Jimena was mentioning. If we keep it simple, we need simplicity. Our problem is, yes, I mean, we understand that, and I think there are many ways we can do it in terms of things like not having different definitions for the same thing. I can't remember who it was earlier on was saying, I think in the introductions about, you can have the same product which is defined differently in the waste legislation compared to the product legislation. We can find ways to simplify things in those ways, but actually when you're dealing with such diverse material streams and waste streams, I mean, you can't have a one-size-fits-all approach, and then it gets complex. And then, so of course, you have to have a very nuanced approach, which means, unfortunately, complexity. We have some streams where the supply side is the problem, some where the demand side is the problem, and then we have the different bottlenecks in different areas. When it comes to a European island of circularity, I think I don't think there's so much of a danger for that. I mean, we can see what's going on in terms of trade wars and real wars and so on. But, I mean, if you look at the exponential increase in resource use and the supply shocks and problems that not only Europe is having, we're in a particular situation because we're rather relatively resource poor. Other parts of the world are going to have to get on board. And it's incredible because I'm sort of dealing with our international relations, not the multilateral UN stuff, but specifically dealing with third countries who come to ask us about how is this or that piece of EU regulation going to affect them. And the workload on that side is really massively increasing, and a lot of it very positive. I mean, we've had the Thais, the South Koreans, the Japanese coming in saying, we're like-minded, we want to go in the same direction. The Australians, the Brazilians. So there are a lot of countries that are not only saying yes, circularity is a good idea, but they're also even looking at aligning their policies and legislation with ours. So I'm not too dispirited on that front. Sorry.
I'll comment particularly on the question/comment on enforcement. I think it's an important point that I should have made and didn't, so thank you for your question. Definitely there's a need for proper enforcement of existing rules and of new rules. We can come up with the most complex or the most simple or, the best frameworks that we can think of to incentivize all of this, but if it's not properly enforced, then it will be a lot of efforts that will go to waste. And I think that it's really important that we really have pragmatic approaches to things to really ensure that enforcement is there, both for local products, imported products, but we need to ensure a level playing field so that everybody, basically plays under the same rules. We are already seeing different situations in member states with legislation that is already there, connected to recycled content, and then there are different situations where there's a claims of recycled content, but there's no recycled content really there. So there's a lot of complexities that are creating an even playing field. So definitely enforcement and at borders, but also internally, it's a critical part of making sure that all of this really gets to a successful place.
Thank you. And Joachim, could you also comment, could these EPR schemes actually help to full close the loop? So to create the full circularity with end of the waste thinking and design out of the waste thinking.
That's what several of my members are trying to do. So going more on trying to to make the loop more narrow, where it makes sense. I think we should not make a religion out of it, because as more narrow we go, as more losses we have in the preparation. So we have always to find the right balance and the right application. And this is a topic apropos international dimension, where the EPR systems are cooperating not only in Europe, but also with Canada, for example, and so on, because even many of my members think we are the center of the world and we know everything. But if you go to other continents, Canada has EPR for more than 20 years now as well. The idea is even coming from Toronto in the 80s. We just sold it as German idea, but that's a different story. No, but they are facing usually the same challenges, the same ambitions, so we can avoid staying in the island if we cooperate with the others as well. Just one remark, enforcement and so on. Online sales is the biggest challenge for all waste streams under EPR, not only for packaging, I know it for the WE and so on, and all the friends who are working on textiles. If we don't get online sales under control, all EPR schemes there are bankrupt from the very first second. And it's not only about registration. In Germany, we managed for packaging to get 1.2 million Chinese companies registered. Who is able to manage 1.2 million Chinese companies? Which authority? With which PRO? I'm not knowing. So I'm a big fan of making it simple, and we should treat the new retailers as the retailers. That is my proposal. Because if there would be a local retailer, no one would discuss it. There would be the importer, and they would be responsible for their supplier. Full stop. Only because the new internet is allowing us some new legal constructions, we have to adapt our law, modernize our law, so the new retailers have the same obligations as the old retailers. Otherwise, our local companies are the idiots and will die step by step. And that's, I think, nothing we want.
Thank you, and I was trying to push the floor for Karina, but she really needed to run to get a connection, so thank you very much that you joined us, and hope to see you in the future too. And now, Fernando, please.
Yeah, so, well, on the last comment, from a reuse perspective, we are talking to our like-minded organizations in other continents, Asia, America, and definitely there is similar issues that we are facing. Reuse remains a somewhat local, regional solution. It makes no sense to ship whatever, I mean, when it comes to packaging in a reusable container to then ship it back. So I think that there are definitely standards and principles that we exchange with other organizations to apply the same logic. At the end, Europe, when it comes to environmental legislation, we've always been a bit the front runner, and many other regions have followed through. And hopefully that will be the case as well for reuse. And definitely on the enforcement, I think I will reiterate that it is crucial if we want to make an impact in the real life day-to-day operations of companies and citizens. I don't know if, I mean, at some point the Commission may also think to make stricter rules for member states that are systematically not complying with EU legislation. I know that the Article 7, it's only triggered when there is really a violation of rights and law, but I think the Commission should come up with, I don't know, more original ways to tackle this non-conformity from member states on many different areas, circularity, but we also see it on other areas. So I think it's important that, member states have rights but also responsibilities to be part of the club, and hopefully that will be further strengthened in the next years. And yeah, that will be my two messages.
And then Antoine.
Thanks. I would like to react specifically to the last comment on the island. It pertains to really a lot of trade and circular economy topics, which I worked a bit on. To a few points on that, it really pertains to the idea of classification, certification, obviously, of what constitutes circular goods and services, and then it's a question of capacity building, both in Europe, because we all know that there is a lot of challenges with regards to enforcement of custom rules and etc. And the people in Lille will be busy in the next years. There's a reform of the customs that's ongoing, so hopefully there's some effort that can be done through that. And then across the world, because of course what is a challenge in Europe, it can be even worse in many other jurisdictions that absolutely need to scale the circularity processes in order to have a sustainable development perspective. And so there's a trade facilitation agreement of the WTO that's specifically there to support that type of efforts, customs related efforts. So there's a lot of potential in there. And then in terms of classification and certification, some time ago I had proposed a basic system to structure the debate based with the idea of concentric circles, where at the very center the ISO that has come up with some circularity related standards. It's 49, I think, the code, if I'm correct. Then you could imagine, I'm sorry, that's all popular concept, I know, but the World Trade Organization could envisage some sort of a baseline in the context of a potential reform, focusing on circularity as a way to move forward with the agenda. And then it's a question of free trade agreement and plurilateral agreement to have the common list of what constitute goods. On that, there are low-hanging fruits. EU, New Zealand, for instance, in the FTA, they have a list of circular goods as an annex. New Zealand has actually adopted ACCTS, so the Agreement on Climate Change and Trade, that has a much longer list. So I was always talking to DG Trade, asking them to consider the cooperation framework in the EU and New Zealand FTA to actually consider the longer list rather than the shorter one to sort of expand further and further this type of at least bilateral and, if possible, plurilateral recognition. And then at the outskirts of this circle, you have the mutual recognition agreements, bilaterals, that are some sort of what you can progress as quickly as possible. Because I agree, eventually this is still a risk in the current geopolitical order. We see fragmentation everywhere, we see trade being weaponized everywhere. And if we want to scale circularity in globalized value chains, at the end of the day, we need to consider this in a global way, because businesses will. There's no business, there's very little business except that, not saying that. There are many businesses that operate on a globalized value chain, and they will need this type of system at a larger level. Thank you.
Thank you, and on my behalf and audience's behalf, I would like to thank the vivid discussion and all of our panelists, and let's give a round of applause for all of them. And now we'll have a short break. No, we won't. I was looking Roland. We are not going to have a short break, so sorry about that. Maybe you can have your refreshments afterwards. And so I'll ask Manuela Ripa to come here for the second panel, please.
So then I would like to ask my panelists to join me. So I hope everybody had some refreshments, and I hope that you can all stay with us, because we have a very interesting panel going on about, are we up to it? I mean, we discussed a lot now about the economic incentives and the legislative harmonization for the circular economy, but now we come to our behavioral insights and a cross-sectoral policy for circular economy. I have 3 speakers here in the room, and I have 3 speakers online. One I can already see, 2. That's very good. And we will directly start with Constance Kann, Director of the European Investment Bank, and she will present finance oh God, it's so late, I can't speak English anymore. Advisory perspectives on circular projects, and she will have the nice task to do the bridge between the 2 panels. So, Constance, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to GlobeEU, to Roland-Jan, and for having the European Investment Bank participating in this important event. And I also would like to thank you, Manuela Ripa, for setting the context so well at the start of the event, because we totally agree with you that circular economy is not a set of recycling activities, but it's really a matter of smart industrial policy and of economic security. We think it is important that we shift our economic system to one that indeed is designed to keep materials, equipment, and resources in continuous use. And we really consider that the circular economy requires a materials transition shift as important as the shift to renewable energy. In the previous session, we heard about the enabling factor of technology, digital in particular, but we also heard from IKEA the challenge of the high upfront investment cost. We talked about the importance of policy, both at the EU and the national level, and also its implementation. And we as the EIB, we consider that Europe has an edge, and we have a huge interest on leading on the circular economy. I think we do have the most comprehensive circular economy policy framework globally, but we also now really need to make sure that the bankability of the circular economy is addressed. Because only if we can ensure the market conditions for circular economy output, we can, succeed. Only if we have buyers that are willing, to pay a price that covers the cost, we can succeed. Because otherwise, frankly, the projects will just not be yet bankable. We therefore consider that the upcoming Circular Economy Act should focus indeed on establishing this single market for secondary raw materials, and that we need to increase the supply of high-quality recycled materials, keep value in the EU versus exporting. And let me just, give you an example. If we consider Europe's battery value chain, we collect and shred used batteries, producing black mass. But this black mass is what we are exporting. We therefore only hold 4% of global refining capacity, in Europe on black mass. That's not good, if we want to build this circular economy in the EU. Over the period 2024, we as the EIB Group invested some 5.5 billion to more than 150 circular economy projects. We heard about the investment gap of 82 billion. So there is, really a huge, opportunity there. The other thing that we did is we started to work more closely with the major national promotional banks to align on standards and to make sure that we really gave a push to the circular economy. And we delivered some 16 billion. In that process, we learned that circular economy projects only succeed when a few key conditions align. That is related to clear regulation, and you can put under that also the fragmentation that was already raised, the inconsistency of schemes, but generally, investors need business certainty, legal certainty. The committed buyers, we still have a market risk, issue here. So something, on which we'll need to work. So that's why the flanking measures that were mentioned by William are indeed, very important. The example of procurement. But thirdly, and certainly, not the least important one, is indeed scale. If we cannot, create scale, it will be, difficult. We consider that if we really want to be serious about stimulating investment, indeed, we need to have the right, Circular Economy Act, the policy, the enabling policy environment, but we will also need to tackle the issue of price. We heard again, from IKEA that if the issues like VAT is not tackled, the consumer may not be willing, necessarily to buy that product. We also know that sometimes virgin material is still more cheaper, than the recycled material, because often virgin material doesn't take into account, also the environmental cost of extraction. If we want to achieve scale, we got to deal, with the fragmentation. And we also, again, really need to work on the buyer's side. And we may also need to be attentive to behaviors. Whether consumer behaviors, what is in their way, for buying these recycled products? Is it because the warranty is not good enough, compared, to the other product? What is happening with the private investors? Why, are they, perhaps not, investing in certain new circular economy business models? And that can be, because we're making a change in some of these CE business models from asset ownerships to relying on service-based revenue streams. So I'm just saying, let's be, attentive to some of those issues as well. We, as the EIB, and that's my, my final comment, we consider that we can deliver, most impact and bring most value if we focus our finance as well as our advisory on making sure that the enabling infrastructure is financed. So think of collection and logistics infrastructure, think of recycling and refining capacity, think of digital tools for quality assurance and material flows. If we focus, secondly, on innovation and making sure, that innovation can scale and really become, competitive in the market. And thirdly, indeed, on building these markets. And that's why we have also put such a lot of emphasis on building capacities with cities, like through, our Circular City Center, because we can say, okay, yeah, we come up with public procurement, but then again, still in the cities, we need people who can basically design, the projects. So that's why we think that cities are very important, but also we see that a lot of SMEs are active in the circular economy, and we got to make sure, that they have, access to finance, to green finance. And that's why we have been, working on tools like the green eligibility checker. My final point is simplification, it remains important. It really remains important that, as our MEP Tobak mentioned, that we bring, all these different acts and legislations together, and that we really, remove inconsistencies, and that we really create, the conditions for this circular economy to flow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Constanze, for being so clear on the circular projects that the EIB is investing in and would like to invest, and what we need for it. And now we will turn to Imke van der Loo. She is head of behavioral science of the ECR research project Reboundless at the University of Denmark. And there, Imke will tell us what's with the consumer behavior, if they're up to it. The floor is yours, Imke.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that. And also a big thank you to Globe.eu and Roland-Jan for the invitation. As a researcher, I'm always especially grateful for opportunities like this, where we as researchers can connect with policymakers and people from industry, because I strongly believe that this collaboration is needed to achieve successful interventions, such as the Circular Economy Act. And on that note, I also think it's great to see all the different types of strategies that have already been mentioned today that could enable a circular economy in Europe. These interventions can result in very different types of concrete initiatives, going further than just recycling. So, for example, at the material level, we could think about promoting the use of biodegradable and renewable materials. But then, for example, at the business model perspective, we could think about stimulating more service-oriented businesses and business models, such as the use of car-sharing systems. And these are just two examples of many that show that circular economy strategies could be good from a sustainability perspective, but of course also good from a competitiveness angle, as you clearly said in the introduction already. But the question I would like to ask all of you is, are these interventions good enough? And to illustrate why I think this question is important, I would like to go back to the examples I just mentioned. So yes, we could promote the use of biodegradable and renewable materials, but what we saw at an experiment at our technical university is that when students used green fiber packaging instead of traditional packaging, they ended up littering more. Why? Well, it's sustainable anyways. It's not that bad when it ends up in nature, right? Then the other example, car-sharing services. Yes, they could have a great potential from a sustainability point of view, because they could reduce the amount of cars that we need for our needs. But working together with the Danish car sharing company, they mentioned to us that whereas the lifetimes of cars on average are around 10 years, they had to replace their cars every 6 months. Every 6 months. Why? Well, many reasons, of course, but they mentioned that one important reason was that people don't take care as much of a car that isn't their own. Look at the bikes around in Brussels that are part of a sharing system. People don't park them as nicely as they would with their own car. And these are just two examples of what we call rebound effects. So rebound effects can be defined as the negative consequences of sustainability-oriented interventions caused by behavioral and systemic changes that can offset the potential gains. These were just two examples, but two colleagues of mine have compared over 500 rebound effect cases, and the average offset there was 47%. Of course, this number differs a lot per case and per situation, but I think, and I hope at least, that this number shows us that it's important to think about rebound effects if you want to be sustainable, if you want to be competitive. Then I think many of you might have a next question in mind. Okay, how do we think about rebound effects, and how can we do something about this? So this is what we look into at our research group Reboundless, and we do this with the aid of 3 steps. So first, we look into the identification of rebound effects. In order to be able to prevent rebound effects, you need to know why they happen and what the causal reasons are. Not just from an economic perspective, but also from a social and a behavioral perspective. Also, it's important to take into account the context and the culture, right? Because some mechanisms could be stronger in high-income countries, some other mechanisms are stronger for contexts with high social norms, and so on. Then, if we have this package of mechanisms, we can go to the next step, which is model and simulate. So by using all these building blocks, or all these mechanisms, as we call them, and by complementing them with case-specific information, such as how expensive is the intervention, what materials were used, and so on, we can not only see which rebound effects could happen, but we can also quantify their effects, and we can predict leverage points, so certain points that we can change such that we can enable their prevention and break the causal chain. And then we move with all this information to the third step, which is prevent, of course. And by following the identification and the modeling step, we can prevent rebound effects before the interventions are implemented. Preferably, we would therefore see that these prevention strategies are already implemented in the impact assessment phase of policymaking. Now, this might seem or sound a bit complex altogether, but we have a group of over 10 researchers, all from different disciplines, and we have put in efforts to translate these steps into concrete and easy-to-use tools, not only for policymakers, but also for stakeholders from industry and outside. We will launch this tool on the 28th of October, so everybody who's interested, you're very, very welcome to join, and I hope many of you will, to see how we can prevent rebound effects and how we can tackle them, because I strongly believe that we can only achieve a successful circular economy if we are able to tackle rebound effects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Imke. When I first heard this, that instead of 10 years, they have to change the car every 6 months. I mean, at least you could have thought 5 years, but 6 months, it's really a lot. And I know you present your findings on the 28th of October, but maybe you could just give us a glimpse what it could mean. For example, a concrete tool for this car company, what they should do.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for that question. So I think this is also a concrete example can show how we as researchers can work together with people or stakeholders from industry and policy making, because we have the knowledge about rebound effects, but the policymakers and the industry stakeholders have the knowledge about their intervention, right? So by giving us the information about the intervention and all the detail and the context around it, we have concrete tools guiding you through these 3 steps. And they will therefore have 3 outcomes. Firstly, a list of mechanisms that could be triggered by the intervention. Secondly, a quantified number of how important these rebound effects are. And thirdly, potential prevention strategies for these interventions. Is that answering? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Imke. Now we will turn to Eileen Boone from she is EU policy leader of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Eileen, and the floor is yours.
This is mine. Hi, thank you. Well, first of all, indeed, thank you so much, GlobalView and Roland-Jan, for inviting the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and putting circular economy at the heart of the European Parliament. I've heard so many great things already in the previous panel and right now. And I'm afraid I might repeat some of that already, but actually that means that we are aligned, which is great in the world of today where everyone is fragmented and doesn't agree. So at least we are all agreed what direction of travel we have to take. So that's quite good. I know that this panel is about behavioral change, but for the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, that translates into economics. As people, businesses, public buyers all respond to the choices right in front of them. And these choices are unfortunately still hardwired for linearity. Our economy is still built to take, make and dispose, and throw away is always still the cheaper option and the easier one. As long as that reality holds, even the best designed circular initiative without rebound effects is still going to be swimming against the current. So the most powerful nudge Europe has is to change the economics. to make keeping products and materials in use the economically rational choice. At the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, we see this as one of Europe's most underused levers for resilience and strategic autonomy. It's not a marginal environmental fix. Our analysis from almost 10 years ago now already has put the opportunity for the European economy in circular economy at 1.8 trillion a year. That's not nothing. That's not just environmental margins. That's an economic missed opportunity we're not tapping into today. There is a lot of legislation out there already. There has been so much progress. I was joking earlier with some other people. I had the opportunity to train some lawyers and some judges last week in Germany on EU environmental legislation. It would have not been possible 5 years ago to organize a full week on EU environmental legislation. So the progress is incredible. But I guess the problem is that lots of the progress is sitting in silos, different definitions, fragmented enforcement. And it's there, as we heard already, that we need a Circular Economy Act to bring coherence. We recently published a white paper together with our network. We work together with front-running businesses. We also work with academia to really accelerate the circular economy. That's the only goal we have, and we're very committed to that. And we have 3 highlights or 3 key focus areas. And first one, already mentioned by Constance as well, price signals. Our recent report, the new bottom line, we modeled the measures that actually move the economics of resale and repair in the fashion industry. So if you combine reduced VAT on circular services, lower taxes on the labor they depend on, and extended producer responsibility that rewards keeping value in use, if you get that mix right, gross margins rise to around 55% for resale and 41% for repair. That could mean the difference between circular model scaling and stalling. Secondly, demand has been mentioned quite a few times. I think in the past 10 years I've been working in circular economy. Public procurement has always been the silver bullet solution, yet we're still not there yet. And I understand it's very difficult. It differs so much from cities to subnational to national governments to EU level, but I really think we should look a little bit more into this also with the upcoming review, and maybe not only just look at circular solutions, but potentially look at circular solutions getting more points or getting more grading. That's already a first step. So also this can create awareness around businesses that are working on circularity, like, oh, actually I can apply for tenders, I can get rewarded. It's maybe a step in the right direction. And lastly, as I already mentioned a few times, investment. To meet our circular economy objectives, I think the number has been circulated around a few times already, additional 82 billion a year, 68% increase on current flows, which is a significant gap, but an achievable one. We've been working with investors and finance organizations in our network, and what we've heard from them is that the capital is not lacking. It's simply not reaching circular solutions and the scale needed. And part of that is indeed the de-risking, lack of definitions, lack of understanding what circular business models and circularity is and what it can mean for competitiveness, resilience and strategic autonomy. And the most encouraging part, I think, is all the ideas that I just shared and that have been circulating today. They are achievable within Europe's existing competences. It's not missing of legal power, it's political mandate, the implementation and the guidance, and of course the enforceability, which is a topic that has been discussed earlier as well. And I would like to emphasize as well, and we heard already in the previous panel, this is not just an NGO agenda. Earlier this year, 12 big companies of our network, employing millions of Europeans, co-signed a letter to the Commission, and they did not ask for less regulation. So it's not about deregulation. So simplification doesn't mean deregulation. They asked for more of precisely what we described today already. Harmonized rules, end of waste criteria, reduced VAT, mandatory circular procurement, or at least looking into the options there. And of course, de-risking the circular investment. Business is not the break here. It's it's asking Europe to make the circular choice, the rational one. It's not a story of trade-offs. It's a story of a missed opportunity. The Circular Economy Act is how we meet businesses where they already are, and it's a turn for circularity into resilience and strategic autonomy for Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eline. Also for pointing out the economic missed opportunities. So definitely it's not only something that is on the NGO agenda, but needs to be on the agenda of industry. And now we will turn to Ron Stoop. He's a strategic analyst of the Hague Center for Strategic Studies. And here we will also hear something about defense-related aspects of circularity. Ron, the floor is yours.
Many thanks. And thanks also to the organization. I'm sorry not to be there in person. I actually planned the perfect commute from the Netherlands, which I could have made it just in time, but unfortunately there were problems with the train. Hence, I am online. So I've always learned that you need to give the bad news first and then go to the good news. So the bad news is that there is a part of defense that will be very hard to make circular. And then we are, for example, thinking about drones, of which many are single-use items, right? They fly at something and then they explode into a million pieces, basically, or they deliver a payload with all types of materials, which will be very hard to reclaim. So defense will always be quite a hard case in the circular economy. And on top of that, generally in defense, there are certain principles that go above climate and circularity, and that is operational effectiveness and availability of materials, because the lives of our servicemen depend on it. So they will always prioritize that. However, there is a lot of scope still for including aspects of a circular economy if we can prove that it will improve security of supply and operational efficiency of our armed forces. So what we see in the Netherlands, for example, is that clothes are being reused or recycled. We also see that certain vehicles at their end of life can be recycled and reused. And more specifically, I think there is a very interesting business case for certain critical raw material supply chains, especially since a lot of countries now are building up their military critical raw material stockpiles, which include rare earth elements, but also titanium and actually a list of other materials. So defense industries and also the push from Europe on stockpiling is building. It could be a launching customer for certain of these circular materials. So I would say from the defense industry, those are the main areas where there is a lot of potential, especially because defense now has a lot of money to spend because of the NATO targets. So I think that's the point on defense. And if I'm allowed, I would like to make a short point on cost, and maybe that has already been discussed, but I speak a lot also with the renewable energy companies, which in many instances are facing the same problems as the circular economy companies, which means is there is a possible business model, but they lack upstream and downstream flows, so materials and customers. And they lack the required upfront capital investment to make it happen. We see a lot of projects which unfortunately do not make it in Europe on batteries, on solar. And what I think could be an interesting avenue, especially for recycling companies, to the extent that is happening or not, to really create a package deal with including both recycling and clean tech production on one side. So that would be co-location. So for example, you could do recycling and solar and battery production on one side. And what you could do then is basically make an agreement that solar and battery companies would deliver very, very cheap solar and battery to the recycling plant, which would maybe make them competitive against virgin materials. And on its turn, those recycling companies would deliver raw materials for the production process of these clean tech companies. So I think there is really something to be said for really really combining and searching the combination for circular economy projects and clean technology projects.
Thank you very much, Ron. Indeed, the last thing you were saying, I mentioned at the beginning a company I visited, and they do thermolyzers. I explained with this they can also destroy PFAS, and they have to heat the whole thing up to more than 1,000 degrees, up to 1,300 degrees. But with these thermolyzers, they're producing so much energy in the end that this thing is going by itself. So they don't need energy from outside for the thermolyzer. So it's really something that needs to go hand in hand. I absolutely agree. And also regarding defense, I mean, a lot of innovations are coming from defense. Here again, PFAS was invented there, and then it came onto our products that we use every day, unfortunately. So I think that absolutely it's time also for the defense industry to prove more efficiency, circularity, use more renewables. They also have to do their homework, especially as there is such a big focus at the moment on the defense industry. And as you said, there is also a lot of money in there. Very good. Let's turn now to Eva. She is Eva Bille, Head of Circular Economy of the European Environmental Bureau, and she will tell us more about competitiveness for public benefit. Eva, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation and for this framing. And you know, when we were preparing this panel, we discussed the concept or the notion of reframing competitiveness. And I think it's an interesting question because have we really framed competitiveness very well in the first place? I think if you look up the literature on competitiveness, you need to be very clear on who are the opponents, what is the goal, what are the strategies that we deploy. And I think if you ask all the different people in this room, these questions, I think, will get very different answers. So competitiveness in service of the public good, well, competitiveness is also a natural phenomenon of plants competing for, you know, the best sunlight, and us competing for the best water or the cleanest soil or the best conditions for life. So if we're having a nice global competition on how to create the best living conditions for all people on this planet, then, you know, that sounds very nice, but I think this is not this is probably not the framing that is in most people's minds, but I do want to reiterate that it is for everyone's best interests, be they businesses or the people who also have businesses, to have better access to resources. And in order to do that, in order to have access to resources, I think it was a good framing in the beginning of this whole session that circularity should be the new economic standard, as you said, Manuela Ripa, because it is not just about creating a secondary stream of raw materials that can add more material to feed our linear economy. We should make the whole economy circular and then use the materials that can be recirculated. And to that end, I think it was brought up by several interlocutors, and I take the opportunity now that the Act is not out yet, and we have a moment of being able to say, to dream and ask for what we want to have in the Circular Economy Act. I do believe still in as was mentioned by other speakers, in the principle of targets. Setting overarching resource use reduction targets. As we are in let's say, planetary boundaries are flown around like willy-nilly a little bit, but we are currently in Europe at least operating at least 4 times what the planet can sustain. So that must then mean a reduction if we want to stay within what the planet can sustain. And indeed, some countries, some member states have already set targets or have ideas of what these targets could look like. I find it quite interesting in Germany, for example, where they've set a material footprint target of 6 to 8 tons per capita by 2045. Have they implemented it yet? Maybe not. But I think what is interesting is that it has led to a lot of research on what does this mean? What does it mean in practice to live a 6 tons per capita life? And it is not in conflict with an affordable or indeed a life full of well-being. So I think what targets can do is also create direction for researchers as well to look into what should life look like if we do that. And in the absence of targets, then we are just, I think, focusing a little bit too much on bringing more materials into an economy that remains, that unfortunately remains linear. What does it mean then in the context of what has been discussed what some of the other speakers have said? I think in the Circular Economy Act, looking at harmonization, it's also, again, like competitiveness, a very neutral word. What are we harmonizing? Are we harmonizing to the highest common denominator? Are we harmonizing with high environmental standards? Will we have in the Circular Economy Act a dual legal basis so that there's also some focus on the environment and some focus on the single market so we can still drive a race to the top in the single market? If we have harmonized EPR, if we have strengthened EPR, what does it mean? Does it prioritize waste prevention? Do we enable reuse and repair? Do we hold producers accountable for the full life cycle of their products, also when those products leave the EU, as was mentioned by some of the previous speakers? So I think harmonization could, yes, make sense if we do something, if we harmonize something that is valuable and that leads to this this competitive, as we define it, public good of a well-being society. Now, if we look at, I think, some of what was mentioned as another stepping stone to get there, other than harmonization, I really appreciated the strong focus on more data, more monitoring, and more enforcement, which I think is a really important point. And I hope that everyone in this room will carry this message to all of the people they talk to who are working on all of the various omnibuses right now, which by and large seem to be asking for less data and less monitoring and less enforcement overall. So if we all agree that a stronger focus on data and a stronger focus on knowing what is happening across all of the resource flows, well then let's do smart simplification where it is meaningful and where people don't have to fill in. No one likes paperwork, so let's get rid of the let's actually ask and have time to do a proper impact assessment of where that would make sense, where we can get rid of unnecessary paperwork, but let's not go straight to saying, well, then let's not ask for any data, because clearly that is not going to solve the problem that we're trying to solve. Also, in line with that, I mean, speaking of implementation, a lot was said about all of the rules that have already been adopted, which I agree. A lot of progress has been adopted at the framework level, but we need to have, again, ambitious implementation. And if we look at what's happening right now, at least it's not done yet, but what's on the table for the first delegated acts under the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products Regulation, I must say I'm not clapping yet, because there's not much focus on getting the right materials in the loop in the first place, or durability, or really having, I mean, if you look at some of the suggestions for steel so far, they are looking at, like we could have potentially coal-fired steel in some of the top A and B categories in the label that will be proposed under the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products Regulation. This is not done yet. I hope and think this will not be the final label, but we need to really stay ambitious on the implementation of the laws that we put in place if we want to if we want to be able to say that we're building on something. Because if we don't do it well, then we're not really building on much. And as a final point on that, I think in terms of what was mentioned previously in flanking measures, and on also, since this panel is about behavioral change, it was mentioned previously that consumers are typically not the barriers in terms of not wanting to buy recycled products. I think that's not really that is not really a huge issue, but what is a problem on the other side of it is how consumers are continuously manipulated into buying products that they do not necessarily want or need, or think that they have a need because they've seen the same ad 25 times, but actually they didn't actually probably need that in their homes. So looking also into what can we do in the Digital Fairness Act and in the implementation of the Empowering Consumers for the Green Transition Directive, if we consider those as flanking measures as well, then to change the inflow of what consumers are, we all are manipulated into buying in the first place. So fully agree with a lot of the statements so far on really making this about sustainable resource management, which strengthens EU resilience, autonomy, economic security, and long-term competitiveness and viability. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eva. And regarding the behavioral side, I think there is a little bit of improvement already, because at the beginning, when there was written somewhere it's made out of recycled materials, people were thinking, what? No, I don't buy this. I don't want this. At least we overcome this step, that they realize that it's something good if it's recycled, not something bad. But of course, there's a lot of improvement still needed, and definitely no manipulation, and definitely we need more data and more. And thank you also very much for bringing up the definitions on competitiveness and harmonization. Now, last but certainly not least, we will turn to Miriam, who is also online. Sorry, Miriam.
Hello.
Yes, can you hear us? I just say Miriam Trier.
Yes, I hear you.
Yes, very good. Is Director for Sustainability and Public Affairs of Target, and she will bring to the panel the industry perspective. Miriam, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you again for inviting Target in sharing its view on such an important topic for us, that is circular economy and how we can implement a successful circular economy in Europe. I hope it will be easy for everyone for hearing me. Don't hesitate if there is any issue. I'm not sure of my line. So for those who do not know me yet, I represent Target, a leading global floor covering manufacturer. We are committed to shifting towards a circular economy, and we develop products that can be recycled in closed loop in new products. We have since 2010 developed our own Restart collection and recycling program for used flooring. So in short, this is a rapid presentation of Target. And from the discussion I hear until now, I can see that there is always a double-sided situation when discussing on European policies and strategies for transitioning towards a circular economy, contributing as well to our climate neutrality objectives. Sure, we need policies and instruments for supporting the decarbonization and the circular economy transition. Commission is moving forward through the Green Deal and today a more pragmatic approach to simplify the frameworks and avoid the administrative chaos that has been highlighted by many industries. Having as well transversal acts relying on specific product policies is key to make sure that what is developed is relevant and actionable for the different value chains. That's very important to keep the link with what is possible and how we can work on it. So following up the policy development, it seems the Circular Economy Act combined with other tools such as Critical Resource Strategy, Industry Accelerator Act, and the ongoing Public Procurement Regulation revision, the Sustainable Product Regulation, and as well the EPR's Future Development in Waste Framework Direction revision are key elements that could change the game and create a regulatory environment, ensuring less pressure on resource, incentivizing investment for the circular economy, avoiding as well inconsistency and overlaps between member states' approaches, and all that in line with the Draghi recommendation for the creation of a truly single market for secondary raw material that are not more expensive than existing raw materials, contributing to a strategic autonomy. For me, all this would be a no-brainer, and there is a kind of elephant in the room always. And as Eileen said earlier, all that would work perfectly if we were living in an isolated EU from geopolitical uncertainties and if all trade partners were playing according to the same rules in an ideal system. This is not anecdotal because while we are shaping our policies, while we are considering how consumers could be embarked on a circular economy, buying less things they do not need, and ensuring that the companies are really investing in developing circular economy, we understood the money is existing, so we could go further. There is an issue here. Because how can we understand the hesitation of key players regarding investments in the circular economy? How to understand the difficulties faced by entire industrial sectors that are willing to change on the promise of the Commission? If there are chances of success, better regulation and incentives at stakes, it seems to be weird that it cannot take off. So, of course, it is fragmented. Of course, we lack willingness in some cases. But one thing we are facing as an actor who is striving to circular economy is that if everything would be equal outside of the EU, this could work. Unfortunately, after 15 years investing in circular economy, eco-designing, collection and recycling valuable vast material, we are still fragile. The business model is not already there, and we feel sometimes unsupported by the Brussels bubbles. I just take a word that was said earlier in this conference. This would work if there were effective level playing field between European production and manufacturing compared to the massive, overwhelming imports from Asia and especially from China. How to compare and compete with imports from countries with controlled and subsidized economy. It's more than low wages compared to the EU standards. Sometimes it's weaker regulatory frameworks for environmental protection and human rights abuse. It is in reports. Everybody knows these reports. It goes beyond the normal productivity efforts. The promoters of the free market always opposed to the industry. You know the story of the impala and the lion. The impala needs always to run faster than the lion. But the lion does not play with the same rule. This threatens the survival of entire value chains, from raw materials to products. It's not only about the so-called strategic industry or strategic materials. Why traditional sectors providing made in Europe jobs, social welfare today and not by 2030 could be seen as less strategic. Nothing would justify this coming sacrifice. This reality is worse and cruel than our economical theories and belief in the invisible hand on the market. These market distortions benefits to non-EU economies. They are not handled properly at political level. I just hope, by the way, that Šefčovič Commissioner will have free hands to change the game and make the EU less naive vis-à-vis China, because there are some discussions ongoing. My take on this is that without clear shift in trade policy enforcement from lack of resource at DG Trade to EU own interest industry-centric approach to the international trade rules, there will be no reward to circular economy. At Target, we always welcome just regulation for environmental and people protection and a well-functioning circular economy. However, without efforts and momentum to protect the European industry against unfair competition, there will be no European circular economy.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Miriam, also for bringing into the discussion the global perspective and the trade partners that we haven't done yet. So, time is running out, and we have to end sharp at 8 o'clock, but I really would like to bring in some questions from the audience. Are there some questions? And if so, then please also say where you come from. Thank you.
Yeah, many thanks. My name is Isabel. I'm working for Recycling Europe, and I would have a question specifically for Ron, actually, because I found your intervention on the defense sector quite interesting, and you said that in your research you're looking into vehicles, and I was wondering if that also includes ships, because what an activity of one of our members is ship recycling, and unfortunately, at the moment, the ship recycling sector in the EU is not doing very well. The companies are operating at around 30% of their capacity because they don't manage to attract a lot of vessels. And at the moment, military vessels are excluded from the EU legislation on ship recycling, but we are actually asking for them to be included so that they actually are recycled in the EU and are not exported to third countries where they are often recycled under quite bad conditions. And also because they are a great source of high quality scrap. So I was wondering if you're also looking into this. And maybe just a side comment that it's very important for us to take into account the interactions with the different legislations. So what was also mentioned, the ESPR and the Delegated Act on Green Steel and all these discussions around how green steel is being defined. For us it's also quite worrying to see that the definition might be either not sufficiently ambitious or go in a direction that disincentivizes circularity. So we really think that this coherence is needed across legislation. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you for the excellent question. Well, in the Netherlands, we are currently failing at building ships, let alone recycling them. But I do think it's a fair point, and it seems to be a no-brainer to me. In around 2000, we did the same for cars. So there was a responsibility for producers to pay for the recycling, and there was actually an organization put into place in the Netherlands to take care of that, and they have members and they put money into it, and it gave extremely high recycling rates, which then can be fed back into the economy. So I would say that this seems to be, from my perspective, a good idea to indeed implement such a requirement.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Yes, please.
I'm Teresa from Zero Waste Europe. Thanks so much for all of the very interesting intervention, especially from IMCA. I think it's really interesting that you look into rebound effects. And we were wondering, you mentioned your research is published in October. Do you already have any data, preliminary findings, anything that you could share with us on specifically electronics or textiles? Are those areas that you look into in your research? And we'd be very keen to hear any insights on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. And if you ask for insights, is there a specific type of insights you're searching for? The type of mechanisms or prevention strategies or anything?
You mentioned cars, I think. We were wondering whether you were also looking into electronics, batteries, textiles, these product and waste streams.
Great. We have also on our website a whole dashboard of these 500 cases that I mentioned before. So in case you're interested, you can have a look and you can click on the domain you're interested in and you can find scientific studies related to each of those. But two specific examples that I think are interesting in the case of electronics and textiles could be firstly, I think they're actually both similar. So taking textiles, a circular initiative would be to stimulate second-hand consumption, right? And reuse by sharing clothing in that way. And I think this is a great initiative, but the rebound effect that I see happening a lot right now is that it's not replacing textile consumption or like the fast fashion industry, but it's adding up to it and therefore creating additional impacts by having more transport of going there and et cetera, et cetera. Same with electronics. You can think about repaired and refurbished laptops, phones, and so on. But they also make the electronics cheaper to use, and therefore could also be more an additional consumption instead of replacement of the original type of consumption. So just 2 examples, but I have way more, so I'm happy to discuss more afterwards. Thank you.
One last question. No, everybody's satisfied. I mean, we heard a lot today. 2 very important panels. Still? Yes, please.
No, if nobody has. So Leonie Knox-Peebles from New Era. So my question was for Eileen Boone. So you were mentioning your 3 points under price. So you had the reduced VAT that I think we all agree with. And then you were mentioning lower taxes on labour. I just wanted to have a bit more information with regards to what you've looked at with regards to that and what could be done actually at Commission level in that area.
Yes, thank you. Well, I can share the whole report where we have the analysis in detail, and but the analysis on labour has also been like analysis looking into, for example, labour cuts or labour lowering labour in at member state level, for example. This is something that also exists not only for labour, but for example, in Belgium, if you work in a social sector, you can be subsidised because it's very necessary to support people in these jobs. So if you were to look at measures like that, not just a single cut, but like trying to have a mixture of supporting companies to hire or to pay less tax on labour, which is also one of these silver bullets that has been suggested so many times as shifting from labour to material tax. But in this case, it has actually been proven that if you mix it together with EPR and a lower on VAT for reuse and repair, that it actually creates higher margins. And it's just for the textile sector, though. So also happy to share the data and the modelling in a bit more detail. As I must admit, it's been a long day, and I'm not sure if I get all the numbers correctly, and I'd rather not say anything wrong. But yeah, thanks for the question.
Thank you very much. Then I would like to conclude today's event on circular economy. Thanks again to all the panelists, to the audience and the panelists also online, to all you here in the room. A big, big thank you, of course, to RJ and Globe EU for organizing these great panels and great discussions. I have some takeaways that are along one page, so I don't think that I'm going to read them all out. But I just would like to say that we showed today that circular economy is key for our European industry, and it needs to become an essential pillar of European industrial strategy. We showed that we need consistency, we need harmonization, we need more data, more enforcement, more monitoring, but not only, we need also to have a look at the consumer behavior, to create skills, to have bankable solutions. Thank you very much for the EIB being present here today, and many, many other things that I didn't say. Now I shouldn't start reading out my list, because of course we also have the public procurements and many other things. So thank you all for being here, and I'm looking forward to the Circular Economy Act, that we will succeed in keeping Europe in the lead. Thank you very much.